Hello, folks. Todd Halleck coming to you this beautiful fall morning from Lewiston, Utah. Talking to you today about asset protection. With fall means football, right? Watching game over this weekend between the Arizona Cardinals and the Las Vegas Raiders, and I was reminded again about the importance of protecting your assets as the overtime clock was ticking away. The Las Vegas Raiders are driving for probably at least a field goal attempt when they cough up the football, and the Arizona Cardinals pick it up and run it back for a touchdown to come back from 20-point deficit to win the game in overtime. As in football, so in life, protecting our assets is incredibly important. Not a week goes by that I don't meet with someone about their concerns about asset protection. One thing to understand about asset protection is that asset protection isn't about fraudulent behavior. We're not trying to defraud creditors. We're trying to take legal steps, legal actions to allow you the best possible results in the event that you find yourself in trouble with creditors, or if people are coming after you for improper means or things you didn't actually do, that you're in a place where your assets and your hard work can be protected. So this isn't about being fraudulent. I unfortunately have had a few too many clients sucked into schemes that were sold by attorneys or planners of other kinds that were going to protect assets, and they paid 15, 20, $30,000 for these plans when there was really nothing to them. The emperor had no clothes. It was a Potemkin village, if you will. It was just paper transfers, a shell game, and that if anybody actually was able to peel back a little bit and get a look, they would easily move through the things that were set up supposedly to protect assets, which didn't really do it. So there is some fundamental things that each of us can do to protect our assets from creditors or those that would try to separate us wrongfully from those assets. And I like to refer to that as the 7 levels of asset protection. And so let me run through those with you briefly today. The first level is be discreet, right? Don't flaunt it. Keep quiet about your assets in this day of an age of social media, Facebook posts or Instagram or TikTok or whatever the different things are, or maybe in the future. There's a tendency to want to show off the different things that we have or that we're doing to the world. Well, you're giving information out about yourself, and you're allowing people to know that you're doing these things or you're having these things. And those are things that could be potentially seized from you someday. So if you have it, you're like, as they say, if you've got it, don't flaunt it. So be discreet about your wealth and about the things that you have. The second level is, in the law, there are already exemptions built in for certain kinds of assets or certain portions of assets. Each of us has a homestead exemption. Depending on the state that you're living, that may be more or less, but each state has a homestead exemption that will allow you to protect at least a portion of your home. And in some states, like Florida, for example, you can protect the entire home. So utilize that homestead exemption. Retirement accounts such as IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, these have a asset protection exemption, so they can't be seized by creditors. So utilize these assets to protect your assets. Life insurance, permanent life insurance, has this type of creditor protection, so utilize those. Make sure you're taking advantage of those exemptions that already exist in the law. Insurance, liability insurance is what I'm talking about here. Umbrella policies, things of that nature, things that are going to protect you and provide defense for you in the event that you get sued by a third party. That's a third level of asset protection that you can put in place. Just because we have entities or different things in place doesn't mean the assets within those entities are protected. And so that's where insurance comes in. I've probably mentioned before in these videos that I have people ask me, do I need an LLC or should I get insurance? And they're really doing two very different things, and the answer is usually both. But having insurance in place at a sufficient level, and that's always a tough question, right? The question we get is how much insurance should I have? And the answer to that is always, well, how much are you going to be sued for? We don't ever know that in advance, and so you want to have sufficient insurance. The way insurance works is if, say, you have $1 million policy because you have $1 million of assets that you're trying to protect. Well, the insurance protects that first $1 million judgment, but if the judgment is for 1.5 million, that next $500,000 is going to be able to come out of those assets. So trying to make sure you have adequate insurance for the risk that you're involved in is extremely important. A fourth level is ownership of assets. Different ownership can create different liabilities. If you're a doctor and your spouse is in an occupation that carries very little risk, or maybe they don't work, maybe it's appropriate to have ownership vested in the spouse who isn't working or who has an occupation that's less risky than, say, the medical professional. So addressing ownership, if you live in a community property state, that holding of that can create greater exposure to debts and liabilities of both spouses than if you live in a separate property state. So considering ownership and the risks of the owners of a particular asset and structuring that ownership accordingly can be another way of gaining asset protection. So you've noticed we've gone through 4 levels of the 7 already, and we haven't really even engaged in a lot of legal work, so to speak, in setting up things. This is where we're going to kind of pivot into things like business entities in level 5, corporations, limited liability companies, and the like. These assets, or these types of entities, when holding assets, will protect you from the debts and liabilities of the entity and limit the exposure of the liabilities of the entity to just the asset that the entity holds. Additionally, depending back to level 4, how you own that company, you may gain some additional protection for the assets inside of that business entity, that LLC. So level 5 would be establishing appropriate entities like LLCs or corporations. Level 6 would be moving into asset protection trusts. These are irrevocable trusts that are meant to own assets or own entities, even better, that own assets, so that while you personally can be sued, the trust itself can't be. Asset protection trusts can take on a variety of different flavors. Some states, including my home state of Utah, actually allow what are called domestic asset protection trusts, so that an individual can be the person who establishes the trust and who is the beneficiary of the trust for asset protection purposes. There's going to be specific requirements that you have to meet to establish those kinds of trusts, but meeting with your estate planner, asset protection planner, and talking about the different kind of trust vehicles that may be appropriate to you is another level, level 6, if you will, of asset protection planning. And finally, level 7 is probably the most unique kind of asset protection that we see, but that is foreign asset protection trusts. Foreign asset protection trusts are when you're actually going to move assets, usually assets of a liquid nature. It would be relatively difficult to do this with assets like real estate, but assets of a liquid nature offshore to a different country like the Cook Islands or the Bahamas or the Caymans or something like that, and you'll have a separate third party that manages those assets, and you're taking advantage of the laws of that particular jurisdiction. So those are the 7 levels of asset protection, from relatively simple to really complex. Don't flaunt it. Use existing exemptions. Get good insurance in place. Look at ownership structure. What's the best for your particular situation? Establish appropriate business entities. Consider domestic asset protection trusts, and then moving on to foreign asset protection trusts. Those 7 levels of asset protection should cover you in so many ways. And again, remember, asset protection, it's not a magic pill. Rarely can you protect everything. Definitely not about being fraudulent. Definitely not about being sneaky. It's about protecting yourself in advance from the storms that may come. And that last part is really important, in advance. If you wait until the storm has come, it is often too late to take advantage of any of these tools. And so I leave you with that today. I hope you have a great week, great weekend, and enjoy some football this weekend. I hope your teams are doing great. Thank you.